Welcome back. We are now in step 2. And in this step, I'm going to show you how you teach your child to change their behavior from being really reactive and challenging to being much more mature and appropriate. And I broke it into 4 lessons. So we're going to start with how you set very clear expectations and boundaries for your kids. Then we're going to go into how you use their choices to teach them a better way. And after that, I'm going to show you how you handle their resistance. When they push back, when they make things difficult, I'm going to actually show you some great things to say and pretty much exactly how to respond in those moments. And at the very end, I'm going to tell you about your first conversations with your kids. I'm going to give you some models and some really great ways to get this whole thing started once you finish the course. All right, before we get into all this, experience has taught me that a lot of parents want to listen to what I'm about to say and say, wow, that's some really good stuff. I'll put that into place when I need to. I want to encourage you not to do that. I've tried to make this as simple and straightforward as possible, but I've created a couple of worksheets that I'm going to be showing you here in a few moments. And I really encourage you to work on those worksheets now while we're going through this. And they're not that complicated, but you know, in the heat of the moment, when your child is being challenging, that is the worst possible time to try to remember what you're supposed to do or try to figure out what you're supposed to do. It's much better for your kid and for you if you've thought about that ahead of time so that when you're in that moment, not only do you know what to do, but you're confident you're doing the right thing. And that's what I really want to equip you with as we're moving forward. So let's start talking about clear expectations and having a very clear boundary for your kids. You know, a lot of times as parents, we think our expectations are clear, but what we find out when we really dig into it is it might be clear for us, but it's not that clear for our children, and we're not connecting the expectations to their behaviors in the moment when they need it the most. Let me give you an example. There was this mom that came to me because her son was being very mean. He always had to be right. And with his friends, he was always pointing out how they were wrong and putting them down. And in the home, he was really being aggressive with his sister. No matter what she did, it was not good enough. And he would point it out. He was always better. He was always faster. He was always smarter. And when they got into conflict, he would just be flat out mean and cruel. He'd call her fat, stupid, ugly. And no matter how many times the mom had told him to stop, when he was around his friends or around his sister, he would go right back to the same thing, do the same thing over and over and over. And she tried to give him consequences and punish him. None of that seemed to work. Well, when I was listening to what she was telling him, I realized pretty quickly that her expectations were not that clear. She was saying things like, you need to be nice and stop being mean, but she wasn't being clear enough. And then the other thing was, she was having these conversations outside of the moments when he was having the most trouble, when he was being mean, when he was around his friends, when he was around his sister. And that's a huge point. We can talk to our kids all day long and they can agree with us. They can say, yep, I know that's not the right thing to do. I know what the good choice is. And 5 minutes later, they walk around the corner, they get with their friends or their sibling or whatever the situation is, and they do the exact same bad choice over and over because they can talk to us about it in a moment when things are peaceful and calm. But when it's the heat of the moment, it's a habit. They just fall right back into the same pattern. So it's important that we catch them in that moment as much as possible. And I'll tell you right now, you're never going to be able to be there every time that they're making a bad choice. But the more you can be, the more effective the teaching is. So I have a tool that I want to show you that really gets this set up and helps you with your kids. I call this the line. Now you may choose to call it something different, and that's okay. I've just found that this is a really good way for kids to understand where the boundary is around their behavior. And that's exactly what we want them to know. We want them to know in crystal clear terms what behaviors are crossing the line, what behaviors are inappropriate, And then we want to teach them how to stay away from those behaviors, how to keep them from crossing the line. So let me explain this to you. Take a look at this. You see this line here? This line represents what is acceptable behavior and what is not acceptable behavior. What is being respectful versus being disrespectful. So when they cross the line, we want them to know very specifically what they have done to cross that line. And if you notice this list, I have some examples here. Screaming, name calling, talking back, cursing, slamming doors, fighting, hitting, refusing to listen, breaking things, lying, stealing. All of these are inappropriate behaviors. Now, they might not all apply to your children, and that's not a big deal. Just think about what your kids do. You don't need this exhaustive list of every inappropriate behavior. What do your children do? How do they cross the line? That's what you want to go with. And also notice on this list that these things are not vague terms such as don't be mean. These are very specific behaviors, and that is a very, very important point, okay? Because it's too far removed. It just takes longer to learn when we're talking in conceptual terms to our kids. You want them to know the exact behavior. You just screamed. That's crossing the line. You just called someone a name. That's crossing the line. You see the difference there? That's very important. So you want to put the things that your kids do and put it in the actual behaviors they do. Now, on the other side of the line is what is acceptable behavior, right? And another way of looking at it is everything on the acceptable side is when you as a parent don't need to really do anything. They're doing good, everything's fine, you don't have to respond. So, because sometimes they're maybe not the best behavior, but they haven't crossed the line. But when they do cross the line, here's another very important point. I want you to hold that line very firmly. And I know it's a temptation sometimes to let things go. Like, well, they were trying or they were really frustrated. No, we don't want to do that. Especially in the first few weeks as you're implementing this new way of working with your kids. I want you to hold that line very firmly. Now, of course, you're not going to see every time they cross the line. Sometimes you're not going to be there. Sometimes you're just not going to notice it. But when you do see it, and especially when it's obvious that you see it, I want you to kick in with the consequence and the teaching. And I'm going to tell you all about that in the next lesson. But right now, I just want you to focus on defining where this line is for your kids. Now, there's another line here. See this one with the dashes in it? Okay, this is not a line of warning. I want to be very clear. This is not giving your kids warnings, which is really, hey, they've crossed the line, but I'm going to give them another chance, and I'm going to try to get them to change their behavior. No, warnings don't work. Kids will adjust to warnings, and they know they just have more time to be in the inappropriate behavior before they have to respond. So this is not a warning line. But what this is, I call it, think of your gut as a parent. There's times that you can just see what's about to happen. Your kids are heading down the path and you know they are going to cross the line. Maybe they're grumpy, they're moody, it's a situation that they really struggle with. That is a point of learning. That's when your gut tells you, oh, they're about to cross the line. Maybe I can get them to stop and think about what they're doing. And that's what you want to do. That's where you say, hey, I see that you're getting kind of upset. I don't want to see you cross that line. Think a moment about what you need to do. Make a good choice. Or maybe they're on their Xbox and that's been a continual problem, getting them off the electronics. So you say, hey, there's 5 more minutes till your time's up. I want you to make a really good choice. Think about what you're going to do. Don't cross the line. Don't get upset. Don't do that thing that you've done before. See what I'm getting at there? So it's a way to prompt them. Now sometimes it just happens so quick they cross the line, you don't get a chance to do that. Well, then you didn't get a chance, right? That's where you're going to reinforce and enforce the consequence and the teaching and all that kind of stuff. All right. A couple other points with this. You want to make sure that the things you put on the inappropriate side really are things that you need to respond to. For example, there was this father, he just could not stand that his daughter would roll her eyes at him. And so he wanted to put that on that side of the line. In fact, he did in the inappropriate behaviors. But the truth was, when it came down to it, he was not going to actually give her a consequence for rolling her eyes. But when she rolled her eyes, yelled at him, and then went storming out of the room, that was very inappropriate, and he was going to respond at that point. So the rolling the eyes kind of became that parent gut line when he realized, like, okay, this is when she's getting close to the line, but it's not quite the line. So I hope that made sense to you, but just make sure that everything that you put on the inappropriate side, where you define where that line is truly stuff when you're going to need to kick in with a consequence. That's where we really need to teach them. Okay, now look on the opposite side of this. See this other line? This line is also very important. This is the boundary, this is the line of really good, outstanding, acceptable behavior. And we want them to know where that line is too, right? It's not just stop the bad stuff, but we want to move them to the good behaviors. And you want to define those as well. And it's really is going to be almost the exact opposite of the other line. So in here I got some examples of when you listen and respond the first time. When you get ready for bed without having to be told. When you say something nice to somebody. When you tell the truth. When you control your anger. And again, we could go on and on with those things. But think about the behaviors that you're really trying to target with your kids on the good side of things. And when they cross that line, we want to acknowledge it. We want to make a big deal out of it. Not reward. Okay? We don't pay our kids or give them things just to motivate them to do good behavior, because they're doing it for the reward, and that always backfires in the long run. Later, I think it's in step 3, I'm going to talk about celebrating and how you really connect with your kids when they're doing the right thing. But we'll get in that later. Right now, this is just more of an acknowledgement of pointing it. And of course, there's another one of these prompting lines. This other dash line. This line is when you see them getting really close to crossing that great line, and that's where you want to point it out to them. Hey, keep going. You're doing great. That might be that they're playing well with their siblings, and you say, wow, you guys have played almost a whole game without arguing. Keep going. Make this the first game you guys have done where no one argued and no one got upset. Keep it up. Or maybe you see them making the choice to turn off that Xbox, and now they only have one more thing to do, and say, great job with that. Keep going, keep going. This is going to be an awesome night. Get the point there? And it's not cheating. Some parents have felt like, well, I'm making them do the good behavior. No, you are definitely not making that happen. What you're doing is you're teaching them. You're teaching them where the line is they need to stay away from, and also where the line is of things being really good. Really good in life. The night goes well, the morning goes well, the day goes well, everyone's happy, there's no stress. That's a great place to be, and you want to guide them to that. So that is the line. And I found that's a very effective tool when you can say, hey, don't cross this line, but you can cross this line. And that's something that I'm going to follow up with and explain how that fits in the next step. But what I want you to do now is I want you to take a moment, and in the downloads, there's a blank version of this. You can either use that or get out a piece of paper or on your device, however you want to do it. But take some time and fill out those lines. Mark both sides of it. What is inappropriate, what is crossing the line, and what are those really great behaviors that you want to see with your kids. And in the next lesson, we're going to really tie that in with choices and consequences, and then we'll eventually get into how you really respond. And you'll see how all this gets together. But just take a moment, fill this thing out, and I will see you in lesson number 2.